Everybody, and welcome to the InPower Coaching Coffee Break. We do this every Tuesday at 1 o'clock live till 1:30. Recordings, podcasts are up on our site at coffeebreak.InPowerCoaching.com. I'm Dana Theus, executive coach and founder of InPower Women and InPower Coaching. And on these calls, we really focus on a whole wide variety of topics about surviving and thriving in your personal power in the workplace. And most of the time we're talking about, leadership or career development, or even how to lead teams or how to lead companies if you're a leader or in human resources professional. But this time we're going to be talking about something super personal. I have as a guest today Roxana Damas, who is an expert on many different levels with sexual abuse and violence. And we're going to talk about it today from the standpoint of the workplace, because if you want to take a completely hard line, when you're thinking about, what is making my employees effective and productive for my business or my team or for my career, if it's you personally, we can't screen out the personal lives and the personal realities that people have. Matter of fact, we have to embrace them and bring them in order to be effective. And when there's abuse and violence going on, either for the individual or in the group, either at home or in the office, it is not only hurting your business productivity, but it's hurting your people. And so we need to open ourselves up to, how do we recognize that? What do we do if we think we see it? If we're experiencing it, what can we do about it? And that's what Roxanne's going to help us with today. So welcome, Roxanne.
Hi, thank you for having me, Dana.
I'm going to read your bio here. Now, I shortened this just because it was so long.
Just say a one-liner.
No, not like that. But this is your background is so impressive in this area. So Roxana Damas is an expert consultant to small businesses, nonprofits, corporations, looking to expand on social responsibility. She has experience in economic empowerment, language access, and community engagement projects. Roxana's key strengths are in building systems change for social services and policy, operations, and reworking business models to include the intersectionality between industries from public, private, and nonprofit sectors. So she's all over the place is another way of saying it. She is the owner of RD Consulting and Translations and has been in the consulting business for over 15 years. Currently, Roxana is a co-host of a financial empowerment segment on Mundo, Fox, and TV Australia, Northern California. Roxana holds a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Davis, and a transglobal MBA from the St. Mary's College of California. So where you see cohorts, I went to UCLA.
Yay. Love it.
Long time ago. So we were just talking before we started the recording that this is a topic that's important to both of us. And a lot of people think, well, sexual abuse, domestic violence, those are things that just happen at home. And I'm talking about the stereotype here. It's just stuff that happens at home to lower economic, lower socioeconomic strata, people in our world, it doesn't affect me. But I don't think the stats tell that story. So can you give us a picture of, who is it in our world that's experiencing sexual abuse and or domestic violence?
Yes. And that's really what brought me to this work. I think it's just being the bridge. You said, I'm all over the place. I have a lot of different backgrounds, but mainly it's because I felt like I had this knowledge about all the abuse, and somehow it was playing out in all these different areas, whether it be business or policy, wherever it was just playing a role. And so I was able to see those connections. And first thing I noticed is it really didn't matter what social class, immigration status, economic status, just whatever it was, language, country. I've been all over the world basically doing this work. And I cannot tell you how naive sometimes we all are. And we like to think about this just doesn't happen. But when you do this day to day, like I have, and throughout the years, it's just, that it happens at every stage. It can happen to anyone. It can happen to someone who's educated or not educated. Matter of fact, sometimes I get more concerned of those who are educated because they feel they can handle it and they don't say anything. Or if you have financial status, you just want to isolate yourself. You're really concerned about other things. Whereas maybe if you have lower income for different reasons, you get exposed to even getting help earlier than some of the other ones. So I do have to say, sadly, I'll have a job if I want to do this the rest of my life, because there's not a place in the world that it's not happening, and definitely not a social class or space that it doesn't happen.
So that's really important to me, because in my work as an executive coach, what I notice there are people who are being emotionally abused who don't recognize it.
Yes.
And I think what I come to this work with is an understanding that's growing for myself, that more and more of us don't recognize when we're being abused. And I'm not just talking about women, although, the stats on women experiencing some kind of sexual harassment are like 1 in 3.
Yes.
Which is kind of mind-blowing. Of course, I've experienced it, and I didn't really kind of focus on how important that was to my development until maybe 10 years ago. I was just shut it out. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about that. What does abuse look like, particularly from the workplace lens, which means either in the workplace or maybe someone is experiencing it at home, but that they bring their whole selves to work whether they want to or not. What is it that we might see in the workplace that would give us some clue that there's an issue here?
Well, a couple of things. I think more importantly, you just said, sometimes you just push it away. And I think as women in general, even men, I think we're so used to normalizing violence of this type, whether it be emotional, financial, verbal, you name it. It really turns out to be something that we continue feeling like, oh, it happened, so let's just move on from it. Or it's not the space to talk about it, which would, be at work, for example. But the bottom line is that it's happening everywhere, and maybe in some places not as much as others. Some people may be more conscious, or maybe it's been shifting in some areas. But truth is, till this day, we're still hearing about sexual assaults on college campuses. And specifically, like I work a lot in the tech world, or I work in industries that are mainly around men, and it happens so subtly sometimes. And I think that is the biggest concern that people don't really know. But if you feel in your gut something is not right, especially like, for example, sexual harassment or just sexual assault, you feel that approach. And I can personally attest to like working at an attorney's firm when I was really young. And I just felt that this attorney was constantly looking for the moment to be there alone with me. And thankfully I had background in that time and I was able to speak up. But what if I couldn't? Because it was really uncomfortable. And so I feel that, one thing is like, your radar, don't turn it off. Know that you can prevent some of these things when you feel that something's wrong. I'm not talking about like all of a sudden you got assaulted in the parking lot, but I'm talking about if there's someone who's approaching you in a way that's just not okay, be proactive and say something. And that is something that I think talk to a partner at work, someone that you can trust, or even directly to the person that's making you uncomfortable. There are ways for you to really reach out and speak up for yourself. And basically it's really feeling uncomfortable that you're approaching me that way.
So this is really important for another reason, which is a lot of us are also becoming more aware of bullying at work.
Yes.
And matter of fact, we just started a new feature on our website, which is, we call it Dear Dana, which is like the Dear Abby of workplace.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, and one of the first questions I got, matter of fact, it just went up on the site last week, was, what do I do if I'm getting bullied by a colleague? Because it's one thing, the boss bully is a little better understand, but sometimes it's coming from sideways, coming from a peer. But coming to this topic, like what's the fine line between the discomfort you feel with a bully and the discomfort you feel when there's an abuse or a violence angle to it? And maybe they feel the same at first a little bit, meaning, like you said, it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But then as it progresses, how would you be able to tell a bully from an abuser?
So one thing is, as far as boundaries, I think that's the real thing. It's like, you need to know what your boundaries are. If someone's getting too close to your face and like that, just invading your personal space, you already know that would be one boundary that's clear and it's physical. Mm-hmm. But when there is the maybe of how commenting on how you're dressing all the time, or just something, or really having like an extra comment. And I'm not saying that someone can't flatter someone, and I'm just going to speak about my culture, being Latina, is just definitely, we're more open to having those discussions. And that really opens us up for both things, either being more aggressive about the issue or not, but also it's okay if you're welcoming it. That's the thing. If you're welcoming it and you're okay with it and it's not being disrespectful to you, then great. But if you feel that this over like sexualized messages or just, it's beyond belittling, like just you feel unsafe. I think that is the biggest thing. You start feeling unsafe. Whereas with the bullying, depending on the level, because I think it could really cross a border there. Depending on the level, it could just be like belittling in a meeting and being more open about it. Whereas this, what I'm talking about, is the stuff that really is not that open. The stuff that gets done behind the scenes, where you're feeling like this could go wrong any second and it's unsafe. So being clear on your boundaries, that's what I mean in terms of like being able to speak up. And just say those words, this is really uncomfortable. Even if all you say is that and just step away, that's a good place to assert yourself.
Actually, I really like that approach for two reasons. One is, I think you're right that, there's a distinction between feeling, I'll just say, emotionally uncomfortable and physically uncomfortable. Yeah. And they're both important, right? And a lot of and they both matter. And you might feel bullied if you're feeling emotionally uncomfortable, like this person is just talking over you in meetings and takes credit for everything you do. And it feels like you're pissed, you're definitely uncomfortable. And that is a form of abuse, but it's not necessarily the kind of physical threat that you feel. And that when you move into the physical, now you're in that space of potential violence or physical abuse. And that's a really important distinction. How am I feeling unsafe? Emotionally, physically, or both?
Or both, exactly. Once you get to that physical part, well, that really, I think it needs to be clear. And the most important thing is when the first time that it happens, that's the time you have to take action. If you let it stay, it's just going to keep on growing, and you will not be able to stop the way it spirals. Because that's the thing with violence. The cycle of violence just never really stops until it's addressed. And the thing is not just being addressed. You have to in order to change it or to make some progress, you have to remove the root of the violence. And this is usually what I work with the parents or with youth when I have to work on that issue. Is like the abuser, not excusing the abuser, but it's rooted somewhere. And so where is this coming from? So if I'm working with a couple, I have to figure that out first before I can give like an assessment of support or what the next steps are. But at work, it's really like, where is this coming from for you? And you may not have the chance that maybe a partner would want to go like to therapy. You can't do that with a coworker. You have to find a way to remove yourself from that and solve it immediately. I've seen it happen with many people, whether it be on campus, at school, or whether it be an employer. The minute you take action, it really changes things and it heightens the response. You want to hold people in your management accountable to that so that they understand that it's really uncomfortable and it's preventative to other people. Usually they respond.
Yeah, and I think I want to mention something too. That first of all, you're absolutely right that you need to address it quickly, because not just in these kind of situations, but any situation, as you train other people in your boundaries.
Yes.
Right. And the way that you protect your boundaries, and that can be on anything, work-life balance, emotional intimacy, et cetera. The way where you put your boundaries is where other people come to expect that you're going to put them. And one of the challenges in dealing with bullies of any kind is that you don't stand up for your boundaries. And then they go, oh, susceptible victim, right? And that's true on these subjects we're talking about. And it's also just true on, regular workplace stuff. So what you're saying is, be conscious of your boundaries from the beginning. Something else I want to mention is a good way, sometimes we're worried, it's like, oh, if I try to stand up for my boundary, they won't like me. We go into this whole, particularly early on when we don't feel threatened, we just feel uncomfortable. We go into this big spiel in our head about why we can't stand up for our boundaries. However, when you do, particularly in a non-threatening way, this makes me uncomfortable. I wanted to make sure you understand that. One of two things happens. What you do is you ferret out the bullies. The people who have no intention of hurting you just go, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize it. And then they factor that in, and you don't ever have to worry about them again. Mm-hmm. But the people who go, oh, let's just speak up. Yeah, exactly. It's like, well, first of all, you're putting them on notice that you notice. But secondly, you can start to see the people who have struggled with that are the people that you need to be more forthright with when it comes to your boundaries.
Yes. And then, watch for aggressive verbal behavior, because I think that's the other part too. If you already know someone is very hot-tempered, if there's something going on, that there's always something's off. More than likely they really don't know how to control their emotions and their anger. And that can have an effect on you in the work that you're doing. So be preventative and be alert and know how to address the situation. You don't want it to escalate. So one of the things I work on, my company is contracted to work with children and family services here at the county level. And so we go in and we do assessments to figure out like where the family stands before kids are removed from CFS. And we really want to see where you are in this experience of abuse and just how you can de-escalate. Some families, it's not a removal of the child, or it's not that someone needs to go to a batterer program, but it's really understanding what are the key issues and what escalates a conversation. So when you're with an aggressor, you being more aggressive, yes, if you have to defend yourself, you have to defend yourself, but adding to the conversation and just triggering the person even more does not create a healthy space. So you have to remove yourself from the space to not create anything worse. The whole point is, this person already has issues. So how can you find support systems with coworkers, maybe in particular working with like HR and management, just creating some like really steady work plans on how this is going to look so you can avoid some of that. And of course, it's not about avoiding, it's really about bringing it to light if it's like super uncomfortable and dangerous for you. But in the meantime, if there's anything you can do to protect yourself, that is really important. But I am always an advocate for speaking up and finding a way to address it. It really cuts everything down.
And something, there's something else in what you're saying I think that deserves highlight, which is that, a lot of times people are like, well, if I say he did this or she did that, they'll just deny it, right? And that may be true. Yeah. But if you say, I'm uncomfortable, nobody can deny that. When you talk to HR or you talk to a manager or a colleague even, and you just say, well, okay, I'm uncomfortable. People can't invalidate that. They can say, why? And then well, so-and-so did this and that made me feel uncomfortable. And now you're in a place where have credibility. And other people can look at that and go, well, that wouldn't make me uncomfortable. And you can say, well, it makes me uncomfortable. And they kind of can't deny it. They can't.
No, and documenting, so important. That's the other thing. You want to make sure you document it and that it's there somewhere in case it does rise up to something else. Because matter of fact, they might not believe you at the beginning, or they might just say, oh, this is the way this person is. We've never had, a problem with them, or whatever it may be. But you already did the process of documenting. And so that's really the biggest thing in any kind of abuse case. You want to document. And if you can, and if if it's an issue and you can't leave, the fact of the matter is like, financially people are scared to leave their jobs and you need your money. So how do you create a safe space for yourself and a safety plan? As I would do with the family, how do they have a safety plan? I would talk about what's a safety plan for you in that school, at work, and at church, wherever it may be, these different places that you would not think that it's happening. If it is, you need to create a safety plan for yourself because no one else is going to do it for you. And that is the key there. You have to find a way, or, look for resources to help you do that. You're welcome to reach out to us on our page here, but it really is something that you have to look out for yourself because no one else is, especially when your HR department may not be as open and supportive as you would like them to be.
Yeah, I like that idea of like creating a safety plan because it's going to be different in each of those situations, right? Yes. And that's okay. It should be. And you might need a different safety plan at home than at work. But once you take on the responsibility for yourself to put it together, you can talk to other people who can help you think of things you can do. But ultimately, you own that. You're taking charge of your own safety, and you're getting the resources that you need. To be effective. And I will just say this is a commercial for, I told you that I was on the board of directors for Dash DC, which is a domestic survivor support program here in DC focused on housing, getting families into housing so they don't have to go back to their abusers or face homelessness. But the one thing I learned there, which is fascinating, is that when they bring in families and treat them like victims, the people, the families, the women don't really get back on their feet. But when they bring them in and they say, you're in charge of your own life, here's some resources to help you. will help you create a safety plan. You have to take it. When they put the responsibility on, quote, the victim becomes empowered because they feel like they have choices. They don't have to take the city services that require them not to work, or, they don't have to refuse housing or accept housing that doesn't let them bring their children, et cetera. So they become empowered. So as someone who's feeling uncomfortable, maybe not yet victimized or victimized, when you start take that responsibility for yourself, you immediately become more empowered in the situation. And abusers pick that up. They have a sixth sense. They know who's empowered and they don't prey on them.
Absolutely. It's a radar. And the thing is, it's your body language. It's, we keep attracting multiple abusers in our lives, and it's not just in our partners, but it's sometimes it's in the workplace, and you can find a survivor of domestic violence who's also being abused at work by somebody else and or by friends and family. And it's really about how are you using your personal power and how are you learning to set your boundaries. And you said something really key, is that in that shelter, they give them the tools. And I learned this a long time ago, and I hope it sticks for those who are listening, is this: no one empowers anyone. We only provide the tools. The empowerment really only happens for yourself. So whether you're helping kids in Africa or helping a survivor here in the States, it really is, you're providing the tools, but you have to teach people how to do it for themselves. Otherwise, you're always going to be hand-holding. And yes, there's a hand-holding period, and there's a lot of support that needs to happen, but it really has to be something that transforms within, because it's about everything. It's your body language. It's what you accept. It's just the entire space and environment that you create and what you allow. And when you decide to stop those cycles of violence in whichever space you are.
Yeah. And the thing is, you can reach out to resources in your company. You can go to HR, you could go to legal, and you could go to your city. Every city and county has some resources for this. But if you're not ready to take responsibility for using the services and tools that they can give you, it doesn't end well. Nobody fixes this for you, which is what you're saying. And I've observed that too. And I've talked to HR people who really want to help when they find out something's going on, but the company can't fix it. They can only do so much to try to create an environment where that's not a factor. And again, you've got to do for yourself what you can.
And that's such an important point about HR or management trying to support. You can do so much to support. Some spaces are more supportive than others, and they have tools, and they'll reach out and they'll listen to you. The thing is, the first thing going into this as a manager or as a coworker that's hearing someone being abused in whichever form, the first thing is non-judgment. I constantly get asked, Roxana, how could you do this without telling somebody, why don't you leave? And so really what it turns out to is I have to come into this space with no judgment, and knowing that many people go back to their abusers at least 10 times, and depending on the level where it is and where you are and how much abuse you've had leading up into this space. I mean, these things, it's 99% of kids who witness abuse grow up to either be the abusers or be the victims. So how do you work with someone to get to that stage? Not everybody's going to be ready. So as an employer, as a coworker, the first thing is don't frustrate yourself. Know going into this that you have to go in there with no judgment. They already know that abuse is happening for the most part, and because it doesn't feel right to them, and they're miserable if this is what's happening on a daily basis. But you all can do is provide the tools, talk about safety, and specifically in the workplace, which you had mentioned earlier, which is like talk about safety at the workplace and outside. What does this look like? Because this is really where it impacts the work, which I know what our focus today is.
Well, it impacts us at all levels, and of course the work suffers as well. So let's talk about that in our last few minutes. Let's say that you have someone on your team and you don't know for a fact that they're experiencing any of this, but you do notice challenges, and they're becoming more challenged in terms of their performance, their ability to focus on work, and for whatever reason you suspect that there may be an element of abuse. What's the right way to approach someone? That's always the problem that we have from the outside is, it's like someone you just found out has cancer. Do they want to talk about it? Do they not want to talk about it? And obviously this is very personal. So what do you recommend to people about how you can take your no judgment hat, and talk to them in a way that might invite them to share with you enough so you could help them.
And this is a difficult space to be in. And usually the best one is if someone confides in you or something happens. That is the moment where they're really ready to talk, and you can provide some resources and, give some support to maybe like asking for help at work, especially if safety is a concern for everyone. But I think that the bigger issue is if you're a supervisor or a coworker and you have the influence to maybe set something up, like, I don't know, like bring someone to speak about the topic or bring resources out there, just have very subtle messages because, and it has to be subtle and repetitive in a way, not too often, but I would definitely say, in a month period, if you know something's going on, let's say something and let's talk about it. And a very valid point about how it impacts your work. There are hours of work lost. There are actually thousands of hours lost because of domestic violence happening in the home. There's financial struggles that really happen. And I mentioned earlier, it's really the emotional, financial, physical abuse that's happening. And I think that's really hard for people to identify because there's this huge focus on it just being physical. And you as a coworker and as a manager, sharing information, you have it in your policies. A lot of especially like in California, a lot of the policies do share that there is like Family Leave Act time for you to go take care of these personal issues, whether you've been sexually assaulted or been through domestic violence. So that's a good like training point and good education space to use. If you're going to reach out, if you think you have a good relationship with this person, I would mention it. You have to open the conversation to it being okay and just, really talking about concerns. Like if you see someone that has certain marks on their face and their body anywhere else, that's a good time to maybe share something, to be open and be like, with no judgment. And really that's the space to be on. No judgment on what course you decide to take. Know that I'm here to support you if you need some help or if you're unsafe. One big thing to point out too, if you know that things are very serious and you're worried about not only this person and their kids, but also the safety at work, because domestic violence is one of the highest risk cases that you can have. Police officers, when they train our teams, usually tell us this is where we usually lose officers, where something happens or because it's so, you never know what can happen when you walk through that door. So if you know that the case is really high risk, you're concerned that there's something could happen, it could be lethal, there's always the chance that you can call Children and Family Services and they can do a healthy check, and it's you don't have to give your name, it's anonymous, and they're able to do that. If you're really that concerned, there's something that can be done and it can be anonymous, and they'll go through the process and really evaluate if there's something that they can do. Of course, only when there's kids involved and sometimes when there's elderly. But I do put that out there because that's how I get most of our cases. And had it not been because of that, we probably wouldn't see half of them because of what I've mentioned to you, whether it be education, financial issues. People do not really want to reach out. But it's when they see the impact that they're having on their children that they'll start working towards it.
Interesting. Well, and, going back to reemphasize something you said, I think that when you go, well, let me put it this way. When you have a value in your workplace or your home or anywhere around safety,
yes,
and you take steps to make that value multifunctional. It's not just we don't want people to cut their fingers off when they're using machines. It's like we value physical safety, we value emotional safety. We want everybody here to feel safe. Then you have a language that you could talk to people and say, I noticed that you've been struggling a little to keep up with your work, and I'm feeling like you're not feeling very safe. Let's talk about that. So if you create a culture of where safety is a value, that's another leverage to get into those conversations. And you do want to be creating that safe space and bringing no judgment in. I don't want to say that's all you have to do to create no safe space, but it's a big part of it. It's kind of
and then it is a big part. And the other part is when it's something that's big, or when someone comes to you and says, hey, there's a restraining order in place, I can't control what this person is doing. Then you do take the legal steps that you and your team have built to create a safe space. You talk to your security guards, if there are cameras in place, and you make sure that no one's giving information about this person. You got to remember that maybe we get the survivor to actually, it's your coworker, you help her, you get her to shelter, but the job doesn't change. So where is the one place this abuser is going to look for this person, male or female? I work with both sides here, or LGBTQ. It's just know that it can happen, and the workspace does tend to be the place where people come out to, and it's good for people to have protocol.
Yeah, that's an excellent. I mean, in the general discussion around safety, sometimes we think of it as like, some wacko terrorist bringing a gun, and it's probably, as the police will tell you, domestic violence is the most like you said, that's the most likely place for violence to occur, is when it gets into this very personal area as opposed to the odd, nutcase out there.
And then, there's the emotional side, the human side, being supportive, but then there's the other side as an employer, as a business owner, you do have to have protocol. If I have to stress anything with any company, is it's happening daily. You probably don't know who this person is, and it's probably impacting your bottom line if that's what you're looking at. And so there are ways that you can create a better environment, and just don't let this catch you off guard. Be able to create some process, whether it be sexual assault or domestic violence or even human trafficking, depending what may be happening at the workplace. It's a whole other topic on itself, but it does happen on a daily basis.
Yes. So we've used up our time, which is kind of amazing because I feel like we're getting going. But so what website could people go to learn more about you and the resources and tools you're talking about?
Sure. You can go to my website. We're just getting it up there right now. I will be having domestic violence information on there this week, so please check out by the end of the week. It's Roxana Damas. That's ROXANA Damas, DAMAS .soy. That's SOY. .soy. It's a new platform by Google that's created for Latinos, and so they, instead of .com, it's .soy.
I like that.
You can also research, follow us on diversityrd.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for being our guest. We'll get this recording up. Make sure you get a link to it. And thank you. Maybe we can have you on again sometime and go into this and more again, because it's just so important.
Yes, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think one thing that it's been a frustration for me is that I sometimes work with a lot of low-income communities, but when I work with women who have higher education or just families that have more money, the resources are less and the spaces to have these discussions are less. And I think they're so important because they're happening. So I think you have a broad audience here that just doesn't cover one side, and I appreciate that. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I like the idea of, consistently getting the message out so that they start to understand, there are resources for them too.
Yes. No, thank you so much. Have a great one. And thank you to your audience.
Thank you. Don't forget to follow our podcast and YouTube recordings of this at coffeebreak.inpowercoaching.com. You can also sign up to be invited into any of these conversations and join us in the conversation via video or audio as well. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Bye.